Hey, thanks for tuning in. You're listening to Gnostic Studies. And this evening we'd like to do a lecture. We are on part 8 of our intermediate studies in Gnostic Psychology. The previous two classes, 6 and 7, we studied the mind. It's very useful to understand the mind. What Gnosis says is that we shouldn't accept thoughts that enter into our mind as ourselves. It is one thing to think, it's another thing to have a thought. Sometimes we think that we're thinking, but really those thoughts could be coming from something besides ourselves. Now, of course, this begs the question, who are we or what are we? And that's what we're trying to answer with these esoteric studies. But Gnosis says that we are, in essence, a spark of divinity who is inhabiting a physical body right now. So we don't want to always accept that the thoughts that we have in our minds are ourselves. They could be coming from what's called an ego, an I, a psychic aggregate that exists within us, a desire, a trapped desire. So what we talked about was in the previous class, because we'll do a summary of the previous class before we jump into today's class, which is going to be about understanding emotions. In the previous class, we talked about how the mind uses comparing and the battle of opposites. And then we need to get out of that battle. A lot of Eastern philosophy is based on that. This is an example. Someone asked Master Bokujo, do we have to dress and eat daily? How could we escape from this? The Master replied, we eat, we get dressed. I do not comprehend, said the disciple. Then get dressed and eat, said the Master. This is precisely action free of the opposites. Do we eat? Do we get dressed? Why make a problem of that? Why think of other things while we're eating and getting dressed? If you're eating, eat. If you are getting dressed, get dressed. And if you're walking on the street, then walk. But do not think of something else. Do only what you are doing. Do not run away from facts. Do not fill them with so many meanings, symbols, sermons, and warnings. Live them without allegories. Live them with a receptive mind from instant to instant. To not allow the mind to take us somewhere else, but to convert the mind into a receptive element, like a bowl, able to receive, facing up. If we're eating and thinking about business, then it's clear we're not in the present moment, because we should be focusing on eating. If we're driving our car and we're thinking about our fiancé or our children or whatever it may be, it's logical that we're not awake, we're dreaming, psychologically speaking. And if we are working, and instead of working and concentrating on the work that we're doing, we're remembering our godchild or our friend or our brother, etc., and it is clear that our consciousness is dreaming. So we need to direct our consciousness and realize that the consciousness is not the same as the mind. We talked about this in the beginning of the first part about the mind. We said there's all these different types of energies, and that consciousness is a different type of energy which is different than the mind. Consciousness is a different type of energy. So we can have awareness, we can have existence without the mind. Thinking is not the supreme in the system that we're studying. Thinking is not the ultimate, but awareness, consciousness is. Which means that we have to learn how to see the mind as something that needs to be tamed. Because normally we're prisoners of the mind, of the ideas, of the concepts, of the beliefs, of the opinions, of the prejudices that are given to us by the culture, the time period, by our family and friends, the way we were raised, the conditioning that we received. We need to learn how to control our mind with the consciousness. Not other people's minds, our own. So that we can liberate ourselves from the prison of the mind, from the duality of the mind. When the one we call Jesus entered into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, he was riding a donkey. That donkey symbolizes the mind. We need to learn how to dominate the mind, how to ride the mind and not let the mind ride us. And so what we're saying is that essence, that spark of divinity, is the one that should discipline the mind. And then we gave a number of techniques. Understanding the mechanism of the mind is the first. The mind works on duality by comparing. Oh, this is a good leader, this is a bad leader, this is a good economic situation, this is a bad economic situation, this is a good clothing, this is bad clothing. All of those things trap us in the prison of the mind. We have to get beyond this duality. A good leader or a bad leader is what? Usually is just because of how it affects us. We don't see it in the objective sense of how the leader affects others and everyone as a whole, or the planet, or their relationship with divinity or anything like that. A good economic situation or a bad economic situation, we don't know. Why do we think that being poor is bad? This is a concept that was given to us. Why is being rich good? Why is being greedy good? Not rich people don't have to be greedy, but many times we think that they go together. We have a lot of concepts, and these create the duality, or they reinforce the duality of the mind through comparing ideas. And we should question everything. Next, we want to use the key of synthesis. That is, as we're starting to analyze these opposites, why do I think this is good? Why do I think that is bad? Which we could say that one side is the thesis, the other side is the antithesis. Then we try to find the synthesis. What is in between? What is actually true in what they have to say? Well, for example, our economic situation being poor or not having a lot of money, it means we're not able to do or buy the same things. But it could mean we also have more time to do prayers, to do practices, to help others, which could lead to different situations, to new opportunities that we wouldn't have had if we weren't in that situation. So they're not good or bad. They just are things that occur or could occur. So we want to extract what is true in them, extract what is true from them. so that we can understand the truth and access the wisdom. Next, what often happens when we sit to meditate is that we have an aspect in ourselves, an aspect of the mind that is attentive, that wants to do the meditation, and then another aspect that is inattentive, that does not want to do the meditation. The inattentive part we can observe, and in order to determine what's going on, why is it inattentive? What is it that it wants to think about? What is it that it wants to direct our attention towards? Analyzing that, not losing our awareness of the need to quiet the mind. That our goal is to quiet the mind, to still the mind and enter into meditation. We can observe this inattentive part in order to see what's distracting us. At the same time, what we may discover when we're observing this inattentive part is that we have some doubts. Doubts about the esoteric teachings. Doubts about our economic situation. Doubts about a promise someone made to us. Doubts about science or religion or cultural values. Doubts about anything. And what we need to do is extract, again, the wisdom, the truth from those doubts. It's not by avoiding those doubts that we're going to get to access the truth. Not by stuffing that down and not looking at it, but by going into it, entering into it, dissecting it, so that we can extract the truth out of it. Something that bothers us. Why? Entering into it. And the final technique that we can use of these 5 techniques, these 5 methods to dominate the mind, is to actually talk to the mind as the essence, calling the mind to order, using the willpower to say, no mind, I don't accept these thoughts, take them away from me. Don't think those thoughts. Don't allow yourself to be used by the ego, because that's what we want to understand. The mind is like a imaging device, maybe we could say, so that we can see things in the screen of the mind. But what happens is the ego uses that screen to imagine things. But the type of imagination that it uses is called fantasy, to fantasize about things. We could say maybe daydream about things. And also to make us focus on things and obsess over things, repeating these thoughts and these images. And then maybe works with another ego in the emotional center, so that we're thinking and we're feeling, and this is creating a problem for us. And so what happens is that the mind is different from the ego, in the sense that the ego can use the mind to create images, to fantasize, whatever it may be. So we can tell the mind, stop. Don't allow the ego to do that. I need you to be still and quiet, calm. And you can say whatever you want to the mind, but understand it. Understand what the mind is. It's not the Lord. The essence, the being, really. The origin of the essence. Our inner being is the mind. I'm sorry. Our inner being is not the mind. Our inner being is the Lord in us. And it is the child, the being is the child of our inner logos, the inner Trinity, the Father, Son, Holy Spirit of Christianity, the Isis, Osiris, Horus. So, in any case, if you missed the previous class, we recommend that you review this material, because it's very useful to understand how Gnosis sees the mind and what it recommends we can do to work against the momentum of the ego when the ego uses the mind. So each one of these 5 things that we just mentioned are given in detail in below. So let's jump into our class today. We're going to study the emotions, esoteric study of the emotions. And if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments area and we'll review them when we have a stopping point. The emotional center is one of the most difficult centers to control. Here we have some quotes from the fire in the emotional center, a lecture called The Fire in the Emotional Center. Among the centers that we have in our organism, there is no doubt that the most difficult to control is the emotional center. Because although it may take some work, we can more or less control the intellectual center through certain disciplines. Right? We just talked about that. Because the intellectual center is related with the mind. The motor center is also controllable. One can control the movements of one's body. You can walk if you want to walk, or raise an arm if you want to raise it, or not lift it if you don't want to. You can wrinkle your brow or not wrinkle it. Thus, all the activities of the motor center are under control of the willpower. But the emotional center is terrible. The issue of negative emotions, feelings, and sentiments, etc., turn out to be very difficult to control. In Hinduism, the emotional center is compared with an elephant, specifically a crazy elephant. So what do the Hindustani people do in order to control it? They place 2 healthy, sane elephants on both sides of the crazy one, securing them so that they will not leave. And then those 2 sane elephants end up teaching the crazy elephant how to be sane. And in the end, the crazy elephant becomes sane. The emotional center is an elephant. The intellectual center is another elephant. And the motor center is a third elephant, the motor instinctive sexual center. These 2 elephants, the intellectual and the motor, have to control the crazy elephant of the emotions. If in one moment we want to explode with emotions of desperation or anguish, that is to say, if we are identified with some negative emotion and feel bad, what should we do? Well, we want to take advantage of these other 2 centers, either the intellectual or the motor. We can lay on the bed and relax. Empty the mind. In relaxing ourselves, we're acting upon the motor center. Because when we relax the whole body. We loosen all the muscles, all the tension in the organism, and then we put the mind in blank. That is to say, we lead the mind into stillness and silence. And in doing so, what happens? Then the emotional center does not have any other option but to calm down a little, to make itself serene. And in the end, the intellectual center and the motor center dominate the emotional center. They are the 2 sane elephants that tame the crazy elephant. It is also indispensable, it is also possible to control the inferior emotions through superior emotions. There are many types of inferior emotions. We all know this very well. If a relative dies, we scream, we cry, we're in desperation. Why? Because we do not want to cooperate with the inevitable. And that is the worst of the worst, because in life, we have to learn to cooperate with the inevitable. Right? Inevitable means it can't not happen. It is absolutely going to happen. So how could we fight against something that is inevitable? And that's where we have to understand what we can do and what we can't do. But when something is inevitable, then we have to handle it in that way. Address it in that way. We do not want to agree with the fact that our loved one is dead, in the example given. And we scream with anguish, and we do not accept it. And even when we're seeing the body in the coffin, we do not want them to appear dead to us, and we do not want to believe it. It is not possible for us that they are dead, and we are the victims of anguish and desperation. All of this is terrible. How can we dominate this internal state? In two ways. First, we can use that pair of elephants, the motor and the intellectual centers, to relax the body and to reach the stillness and silence of the mind. Second, we could switch to a different emotion, a superior emotion. We could do ourselves a favor in those moments by listening to the symphonies of Beethoven, or the magic flute of Mozart, or submerging ourselves in profound meditation, full of superior emotion, reflecting on the mysteries of life and death. Then, through a superior emotion, we can also control the inferior emotions and annihilate the pain that the identification with the death of a loved one brings. The emotional center is very interesting, but we have to take hold of the inferior emotions in order to control them, subjugate them. And this is possible by applying the principles of Gnostic psychology. Inferior emotions are those which are found related to bullfighting. This is obviously from a Spanish-speaking country, right? In most modern movies, plays, and television shows, those found in so-called great parties, those of people who win the lottery, those from reading articles in the newspaper or magazines, those promoted in the military or pro-war groups, inferior emotions like those that come from drinking tequila, inferior emotions like those which only serve to strengthen the inhuman psychic aggregates that we carry inside and help to create new ones. It is necessary to eliminate the inferior emotions, and this is possible through superior emotions. To learn to live an edifying and essentially dignifying life is fundamental. On the contrary, without doing so, no progress of any kind would be possible. There's an exercise given in a book called Introduction to Gnosis to control our anger. If you feel anger or irritated or nervous, remember, anger can provoke gastric ulcers. We can control anger through breathing. We inhale the vital air very slowly through the nose, keeping our mouth closed, mentally counting to 6. Hold the breath, counting to 6. Exhale through the mouth, mentally counting to 6. Repeat the exercise until your anger subsides. Another method from a lecture called Alcyon and Negative Emotions. When you are assaulted by some negative emotions, express yourself in the best possible way in regards to it. If a negative emotion has arrived, if an emotion of envy is consuming us, let us express ourselves concerning it in a harmonious way, not in favor of the envy, but for the well-being of others, which is the opposite, doing the opposite of what the ego wants. If an emotion of anger is shaking us in a given instant, let us speak with extraordinary sweetness, and instead of feeling bad because of what has hurt us, let us speak well of the one who has offended us. In this way, we will not be internally injured. It is not an easy task to express oneself when one has a negative emotion, but we must strive to do so. If we have an emotion of anger because someone has upset us, Let us speak with love and in favor of the person who has upset us. At the very least, we must do this while we are eliminating the aggregates which have produced the negative emotions, so that we will not be hurt. How could we be hurt by anger? Well, anger annihilates the capacity to think and to resolve the problems it originates. Right? They're not called negative emotions because they don't create problems. There's a reason that we call them negative emotions. Two negative emotions of anger that confront each other do not achieve peace, nor do they achieve creative comprehension. Unquestionably, when we project anger onto another human being, a crumbling of our image is always produced, and this is never convenient in the world of inner relations. Right? When a person sees us getting angry, and we get angry with them, and we yell at them, or we say something to them, it changes how they see us after that. The diverse processes of anger lead the human being towards horrible social, economic, and psychological failures. It is clear that one's health is also affected by anger. Obviously, anger is a negative emotion. It is clear that we must not be superficial. We need to eliminate those undesirable psychological elements that have provoked the negative emotions of anger, envy, hatred, lust, pride, etc. in us. Unquestionably, the whole world is being shaken by negative emotions, and negative emotions are more contagious than bacteria and viruses. We all know that bacteria and viruses can cause many illnesses. Negative emotions are more easily contracted than viruses and bacteria. Those grumbling people full of envy that are bothered at all times, those people full of morbid thinking at every moment, those who have a persecution complex, that feel bewitched, who believe that everybody hates them, are negative, and they infect individuals and groups. In our work, we isolate those people. And if they do not understand it, if they feel annoyed because of it, and believe that we do not love them, they are mistaken. Yes, they are loved, and we only suggest that they try to become positive, sympathetic, magnetic, that they receive an opportunity in our studies, but they are isolated in a certain way because they are dangerous for others. A negative person can negatively infect other people. And if this person gives a lecture, they can infect lots and lots of people. They are more dangerous than viruses and bacteria. It is necessary for us to now specify what negative emotions are. If a person is screaming all day long, grumbling and yelling, would they be positive or negative? If a person is into esotericism, and yet they feel bewitched all the time, and their life unfolds in that field, they're always being attacked, would they be positive or negative? If a person is tremendously lustful, and their life processes itself in and around lust, if they see a sexual opportunity in each person of the opposite sex, what could we say about that person? If the glance from another person disturbs them and is enough for them to be lustful every time, what could we think about them? Obviously, we're dealing with a negative person, and that person can infect other people. If a person is always carrying negative emotions from instant to instant, they infect everybody they come in contact with. Right? A person that's always yelling, if you've ever worked in retail and there's a person that's upset when they come in, they're just being mean to everybody. If the people that work in the store or whatever the retail environment is, if they don't know how to handle that, then they get angry. The angry person who is always going off infects others with their anger. A person that always feels persecuted is negative. People like that have to be separated from the groups. People like that do not understand that they are negative. They believe that others do not love them, that they are being persecuted, etc. Simply put, they are contagious people that impede the profound internal development of their being, which is serious. We should never let ourselves get carried away by negative emotions. When a negative emotion grabs us and shakes us, it is worthwhile for us to recognize what kind of psychological aggregate, what kind of ego has produced it inside of us. And then, after we have observed the aggregate in action, we submit it to the technique of meditation in order to disintegrate it. What is most serious about all of this is that negative emotions turn us into liars. And if you studied Gnostic Kabbalah with us, then you know that our speech, our verb, our word is something very important. The lie produces a mistaken connection with our own divinity, because the energy of the Ancient of Days, the being of the being, that flows harmoniously through the 10 Sephiroth of the Hebrew Kabbalah, finally reaching the kingdom of Malkut, our psychophysical person, this energy becomes misconnected and produces an intentional dislocation or disconnection of the mind. And as a consequence of it, the lie appears. Right? So what is this referring to? Well, sometimes we get upset and we say, you never do this, or you always do that. And that's enough to be lying, because generally it's not ever, never. There's some exceptions. So we have to be very careful. Negative emotions make us into slanderers and liars, both consciously and unconsciously. In either case, it is a negative connection of the mind with the superior centers of the being, which produces a dislocation between the mind and the superior centers of the being. One must tell the truth at any cost, to say the truth and only the truth. This is the crude reality of facts. Negative emotions turn people into liars, and the karma of the liar is the monstrosity. Children that are born with 2 heads or deformed have incorrectly connected themselves with the superior centers of the being. As a consequence of it, they come into existence with a deformed body. This is the result of the lie. And let us remember that the ego itself is a lie. So we must pay a lot of attention to this aspect as a manifestation of negative emotions. Gnostic psychology uses the term negative emotions for all the expressions of the ego, of the eyes, located in the inferior emotional center and controlling it, such as fear, jealousy, self-pity, self-consideration, anger, boredom, so-called boredom, untrustworthiness in oneself and in others, etc. We usually accept negative emotions as something completely natural and necessary, and people frequently call it sincerity. Of course, these emotions are quite the opposite. They are unnecessary and unnatural, and have nothing to do with sincerity. They're simply a sign of weakness, a sign of the egoic condition and the inability to learn how to receive the unpleasant manifestations of our fellow human beings with pleasure. That is, to pleasantly receive the unpleasant manifestations of our fellow human beings. Why are we unable to do that? Because of the egos, because we're moved like a puppet. If somebody insults us, we get angry. If somebody compliments us, we feel proud. We feel happy, we smile. But if we could learn to receive the unpleasant manifestations of our fellow human beings pleasantly, then we wouldn't be such a robot. We wouldn't be such a puppet. To be sincere with ourselves would be to recognize that we have I's or egos controlling the emotional center and not allow them to express themselves through us. In Gnostic psychology, there is a saying in regards to the struggle against negative emotions. If we want to transform ourselves radically, then we need to sacrifice our own suffering. The subject is called sacrificing suffering. It belongs to advanced Gnostic psychology. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about it today so we can understand it. Right now, we're suffering, but we don't realize it because we're accustomed to it, and we consider it normal and natural. So-called modern art, theater, drama, soap operas, magazines, etc. are based on negative emotions. And these negative emotions cause a lot of harm to humanity. With the negative emotions, the I, the ego, the myself fortifies itself, obstructing all the possibility of inner development. It is clear that we have to review our behavior every day, which we can do in meditation. We need to become more reflexive, more careful with our critical judgments, but especially we must be more attentive to our negative emotions. In the field of psychology, we find a lot of disorders among people. Everybody is dragged by their negative emotions, and this is something really serious. There is nothing more harmful for profound internal development than negative emotions. So sometimes you have negative emotions related with emotional pain. Feeling hurt, feeling like someone hurt us, a loved one took advantage of us, or however you want to describe it. So there's a very interesting practice that can be done with the rose. So there's a video about it on the webpage. I'll just give you a summary of the practice. You get 3 glasses or cups, fill them with water, and you get 3 roses, and you put them in. And then you pray, asking the elemental of the rose, which is the essence that exists in that rose, that's not yet in a human form, that now it's in a plant or vegetable form, and ask it to assist us, to help us with healing that emotional pain. We set those glasses up in, I believe it is the north, the east, and the west, in specific directions. And then we drink them, drink the water that the rose is in the morning, at lunchtime, and at dinner. You refill it after you drink the water, but you bless it and ask for the elemental to help you to heal, and so you work with it in that way. So you could say it is magic, working with a rose, but it is not black magic, because we're trying to heal our emotional pain, and we're not hurting or killing anything in order to accomplish that. So we recommend that you watch this video. There's also a handout that has more detailed explanation from the book that the practice comes from. And if you have any emotional pain, it works excellent. It works really well when you do it for like 3 or 4 days in a row. Really, really well. If you combine it with meditation, you may have some insight into why it happened, being able to forgive a person, or being able to, like I said, at the very least understand, comprehend at another level that's being blocked oftentimes by negative emotions. So don't forget about that practice. If you need help, if you feel some negative emotions, some emotional pain, you can work with the elemental of the rose to help heal that. Beautiful magic. So we talked about the need to sacrifice our own suffering. We're going to look at that a little bit more to understand that better. When we talked in the very first Gnostic Psychology class and introductory class, the very, very first class, we talked about this exchange that needs to occur in the universe, that there's always an exchange going on, a trade, we're trading something. And so let's understand that we can also trade our own sacrifice, which is an ancient method that can be used to get closer to divinity. When the Native Americans, whether they be in North America, Central or South America, do certain dances, sometimes called la danza, they exchange, they trade, they make a sacrifice of the dance in order to ask for help for others or for themselves, for healing, for whatever it may be. So let's understand that even in the context of the Christian, traditional Christian sort of story, right? Not entering at all into the esoteric aspect, but just looking at the Christian story and Jesus sacrificing himself, we see that sacrifice is there. So let's understand the magic, the mystery of sacrifice. Let's look at this, because this is a key that allows us to progress internally. Sacrifice is necessary, because without sacrifice, nothing can be attained. But if there is anything in the world that people do not understand, it is the idea of sacrifice. This is from Gurdjieff in the book In Search of the Miraculous by his student Ouspensky. He says people think that they have to sacrifice something that they have. For example, that they must sacrifice faith, tranquility, health. They understand this literally. But in reality, we do not have either faith or tranquility or health. All these words must be taken in quotation marks. In actual fact, we have to sacrifice only what we imagine we have, and which in reality we do not have. We must sacrifice our fantasies. But this is difficult for us, very difficult. It is much easier to sacrifice real things. Another thing that people must sacrifice is their suffering. It is also very difficult to sacrifice one's suffering. A person will renounce any pleasures you like, but they will not give up their suffering. We are made in such a way that we are never so much attached to anything as much as we are to our own suffering. And it is necessary for us to be free from suffering. If we're not free from suffering, if we have not sacrificed our suffering, we cannot make any progress in this work. In many medicine schools, especially acupuncture, Eastern medicine, and chiropractic schools, we often hear them talking about patients may come in that say that they want to heal, but that don't want to give up, that aren't ready to heal in this sense. They can be healed, they can be helped through different modalities, but they've become so attached to walking with a cane, or specifically, for the most part, it's the attention that they get in another way. Let's say a person doesn't get much human contact, but then because of some injury that they had, now somebody comes and picks them up and they get physical therapy and they do all these things. Well, they've been doing that for, let's say, a year or more, and now they don't want to give up that contact because maybe they don't have a significant other. That's the only contact that they get. They're attached to that. Even though they're suffering, they're attached to it. They don't want to give it up. So they mention this in many different modalities when they're teaching them, such as, like I said, acupuncture or chiropractic, that there may be patients that come in that you can heal, that you can help, but that they don't want it. They're not ready. And when they see that it's possible, when you're starting to make progress with them, they stop coming in. They start missing their appointments, or they change because they don't want to give it up. They don't want to give up the attention. Maybe could be from their relatives that they weren't getting before. They don't understand. They're not ready to go to that next phase. And so if we can understand that, how that occurs with them, it makes sense. But what's on the other side? What if they were to free themselves from this injury, this suffering, the particular suffering that they have? On the other side of that is something else that they don't even realize. Could be a different lifestyle, being able to travel, or being able to meet people they wouldn't be able to meet because of their condition. We have to look at what we need to sacrifice. And he mentioned that we have to sacrifice our fantasies. Samael and Weor goes even more deep, more specific. He says we have to sacrifice the image that we have. We have to reevaluate the image we have of ourselves. Right? If we think, I need to be really healthy, or I need to be really sexy, or I need to be really rich, or I need to be really whatever it is, right? And then we have to do all these things to do it, because that's the right thing to do, and that's what I am, and that's who I am, and that's what I do. And how much energy are we wasting? How much suffering are we doing? So understand this level, the next level that we're talking about, the move into the next phase, the next octave, the next note, is looking at what suffering we're creating for ourselves, related with our misconceptions about ourselves, our egoic perception of ourselves. And we also need to give up the suffering, let go, but it's more than that. It's sacrificing it. It's understanding our attachment to it. In order to understand what sacrificing suffering is, we must distinguish between conscious suffering and mechanical suffering. Everyone suffers mechanically, but what is mechanical suffering? It is something so intricate, so apparently contradictory, so subtle and so historically long-standing, that it is basically a psychological habit of ours which we do not observe. We do not see its continual inner, private, petrifying action, like that steady drip of calcium-charged water that builds up those strange pillars between the floor and the roof in deep caves. Gnostic psychology teaches that we all have mechanical suffering, and that this is the only thing that we have to offer as a sacrifice. Here's another example. Let's say I come home from work and I'm tired. Right? I'm tired, I can't do this, I can't do that. Or I'm at work and I'm tired, I can't do this. When we learn to sacrifice that idea, that concept that we have of tired, and see how far the body can go, not to break the body, but just to see, just to find out where can we actually go. What's the difference between being tired and being exhausted, right? And the point is not to kill ourselves for someone else, but to understand really what the body is capable of, to know ourselves, to know the motor aspect in ourselves. When we learn to do that, we can see that actually we have maybe a whole different perspective of ourselves, a whole different understanding of ourselves. And the same can be said with the other centers. So again, Gnostic psychology teaches that we have that all we have, let me start again. Gnostic psychology teaches that we all have mechanical suffering, and that this is the only thing that we have to offer as suffering, as sacrifice. In order to change, we need to sacrifice something. Understand clearly and ask yourself this question: can I possibly change if I do not give something up? This simply means that you cannot change if you wish to continue as the same person. To become a different person, we can't be the same person. Clear. To change is to become different. If we want to go to Portland, then we have to give up being in Denver. Now notice carefully what we had to give up. The sacrifice that Gnostic psychology seeks is that of our habitual mechanical suffering. Of course, people will at this point justify themselves and say that they have no such suffering, or that what suffering they have is logical and reasonable. But notice especially where this teaching begins in regard to what you have to give up. According to Gnostic psychology, one of the greatest obstacles to our internal development is being identified with mechanical suffering. We must sacrifice our suffering because mechanical suffering leads nowhere. We cannot awaken if we retain this dreadful weight of our mechanical suffering and continue to nourish it by a continual process of justifying it. How can there be justice in a world of sleeping people, of people who are not yet conscious, of people who are governed by their negative emotions and hate? Remember that hate is the opposite of love. Now how, when you begin to see your own mechanicalness in your behavior, can you blame others who are equally mechanical? Do you not think that your suffering was caused by those same people who you now see as mechanical? Remember that in such a case, you can only forgive, which in the Gospels is called canceling the debt. And this is possible according to our level of being. A low level of being forgives no one. It only sees its own merit. And it is certainly a key of how to reach a higher level of being. When, through self-observation and work on yourself, you see more and more clearly that you are as bad as anyone else, then you work to ascend the ladder of being, which brings us closer to our divine being, who forgives all, a thing we cannot even remotely understand while we have all our negative emotions. Why? Because we all have a low level of being, which means we include very little of what we really are in our consciousness. Instead, we project onto others all that we cannot accept as being in ourselves. So we are very quick to insult, judge, and condemn them. But as our consciousness increases, we include more and more of who we really are, with an increasing lack of conceit or self-love, until finally we cannot be insulted at all. Nor then do we judge. How can we judge others if we realize we are worse than others? At present, of course, we pretend that we do not judge, and our false personality imitates every virtue so that we look good. This is a matter we all have to reflect upon. Gnostic psychology teaches that mechanical suffering is useless because it leads to nothing, but that conscious suffering leads to inner development. In one of the Gnostic books called the Acts of John, which are not included in the ordinary New Testament, there is a passage which says, "If thou hast known how to suffer, thou wouldest have been able not to suffer. Learn thou to suffer, and thou shalt be able not to suffer. If we consciously suffer, if we learn to consciously suffer, then that means we're becoming aware, right? We're realizing what we're doing. We're not just mechanically suffering and complaining. We're using that. We're paying some debt. We're making an exchange. We're sacrificing in those moments. And of course, all of this is reminding us of the need to awaken our consciousness, to fight for the awakening of the consciousness. The key to understanding what conscious or voluntary suffering is lies in our understanding of our present condition and the way to get out of it. Right now, we're in essence inhabiting a human organism, but that human organism's centers are controlled by I's or egos, psychological aggregates. They make us think, feel, and act in almost any way that they choose. But we consider ourselves to actually be those I's or egos, and this is the ultimate problem. This is where we need self-observation. In order for us to fight against them, to take back control of our human organism, we have to stop doing what the egos or I's push us to do. And this is where the struggle, the battle begins. When we start to confront ourselves and our habits, we discover that we are comfortable with this or that I or ego. In some way, it often makes sense to us. Why do I do it this way? Well, it's how I've been doing it. It's the way my mom used to do it. Or this is what, I learned from somebody else. This is how we do it. So when we're sort of comfortable with this way of doing things, these internal habits, then making efforts to go against those habits, against those I's or egos, is sort of painful, because we've already created this way, even though it's a pain, or we understand at some level that maybe it's not useful. So what that means is, what we're realizing is that we need to be more honest with ourselves, with what we presently are. Gurdjieff said, "Sincerity is the key to self-knowledge, and to be sincere with oneself brings great suffering." Because we start to recognize our duality, we start to recognize how many contradictions we have, that maybe I like to eat ice cream because it tastes good, but ice cream is not good for our digestion. It's not good for diabetes either, and things like that. And he also said, sleep is very comfortable, but waking is very bitter. This is because the truth is that our false personality likes being proud, being greedy, being lustful, being lazy, etc. It's easier, since it's supported by nearly everyone around us, and it also gives an immense sort of satisfaction, although it's never really satisfied, and we receive the repercussions or the karma soon thereafter. So to go against all of this seems absurd, but it is the only way. To consciously suffer is to intentionally do something that goes against what our ego wants, simply for the purpose of confronting the I's or egos within and not being mechanical. So to do something that's uncomfortable. Just as a sort of silly example, one day, it was probably over 10 years ago now, I had a beard and I cut, so it was just a mustache. And I would not say that it was a flattering look, but I made myself go to school at the time, to university, and just go to class and everything and just act like everything was normal, just to observe myself while I was doing that, to see how I felt, what egos came up. what was going on inside of me. It was a very interesting moment to do that. But because I didn't want to leave the house like that, because I didn't think it was a flattering look, right? So all these things come up when we do that. Appearance, pride, lots of things. But it was just a silly example of doing something that we didn't want to do. And I was doing it to try and look at myself, see myself. In those moments, so it can be anything though, it doesn't have to be that. In those moments, when we're facing an old enemy, a deep fear, or an activity that we despise, we feel the ego fighting in us, thrashing about, trying to control us and make us think, feel, or act in the way that it wants. And that's what we're trying to observe, to separate ourselves as essence from the egos that we have inside. But when that ego is thrashing about, that is the suffering. When we're identified with it, at least. When we taste the bitterness of the ego while we work to remain conscious of ourselves and our goal. It is a conscious suffering when we intentionally choose to do something like this in order to discover who we really are, what we really have inside. Like for some people that don't like to do social events, maybe going to a dinner party or going to a gathering, may be very, very difficult for them. But if they choose to consciously suffer in those moments, that is, to go against the ego, to observe themselves while they're doing that, then that's different. They're not mechanically suffering. To confront ourselves, to recognize and realize that an empty life like this, of just being egoic all the time, feeding egos all the time, is fruitless, that I've spent maybe 15, 20, or 30 years feeding an ego that served no authentic purpose, that only makes me a vehicle of pain, that does not create anything permanent or real, that's something hard to do, to confront those egos that have been going on for that long, unless we have that inner longing for change, which we call a permanent center of gravity. We need that permanent center of gravity to assist us through this work. There's a saying in Spanish that is, the devil is not smart because he is the devil. He's smart because he's old. Our egos are very smart because they're old. If it's been with us for many lifetimes, then certainly it knows how to manipulate us, how to convince us to do something just this one time, how to justify itself, etc. And if we're not strong in our determination to fight it, then sooner or later we fall back under its spell. Which is why we're going to have a lot of difficulty if we don't ask for help from our inner divinity. Let's remember that in Gnosis we combine prayer and meditation, asking for help, relying on divinity, developing that internal relationship, that interior relationship with divinity, so that we can progress in this interior work that we're talking about. We're talking about how to reconnect with divinity. Today's class was about emotions. Esoteric study of the emotions and the danger of negative emotions. They're dangerous because they're contagious. They're dangerous because we lose a lot of energy. And the negative emotions are difficult because they make us liars, slanderers. They destroy our image, the image that other people have of us. They respected us before. After we get angry, maybe they don't respect us anymore, or they see us different. It causes problems psychologically, socially, economically. Causes a lot of problems. Negative emotions are dangerous. And if everyone is identified with negative emotions, right? And let's be clear, nowadays, the media is being used to stimulate negative emotions in people, to blame one group, say this group is the problem, and then that group's media is saying the other group is the problem, right? They're always blaming somebody. And that's related with negative emotions, to be able to blame somebody else. It's not trying to understand, not trying to understand another person's position. It's just blaming. So let's remember that we can use prayer and meditation together. We can go to meditate and pray, asking for help, asking for assistance, comprehending the ego, fighting against the ego. So those techniques work very well. Tomorrow, at the same time, we're going to do another meditation. We invite you to join us for that. And right now, we want to open it up for questions and comments if you guys have any. Please feel free to leave them in the comment area. We also want to invite you to join us for next week's class at the same time. It's 7:30 Mountain Time in North America, whatever time it's available for you, or you can always catch the recording. We're going to talk about, let's see what it is. I think it's motor center and habits, right? Because we're looking at the mind, emotions, habits, and actions. And then we'll talk about the sexual center in the final class. So we have 2 more weeks of classes in this. Then we're going to vote on what we want to do next. So remember the methods to counteract negative emotions, to work with the elephant, right? To work with the intellectual center and the motor center, to counteract the negative emotions of the emotional center, to use superior emotions, and to express ourselves. The third method is to express ourselves in the best way possible. Because obviously the negative emotion wants us to express ourselves not in a good way, in a negative way. But we make an effort to do the opposite. Oh, so we have a question about how to pray and meditate in order to identify and work with the ego. Okay, so we would, obviously we need to set up a place where we can meditate. So let's assume we have that place right now, but we need to be able to isolate ourselves so that we can concentrate on what we're doing. So that's a prerequisite. Then if we were going to, it just slid off here. Then if we're going to work on the ego, so let's say a situation happened today at the grocery store, and let's say somebody walked by. I didn't go to the grocery store today, so I'm just making this up. But somebody walked by and they gave me a look, or they bumped their cart into me, or whatever, right? In that moment, I was angry with them. So that means I was identified with an ego of anger. So when I go to meditate now I replay the scene of what happened. The whole memory. I was in the grocery store. I walked through the grocery store. I said hi to the guy at the front, and then I was walking in the aisle and blah, blah, blah. And then what happened, right? I looked at the baked goods, and then I walked, and then the person gave me a look, and then bumped into my cart. And in that moment, I was angry. I felt angry. I could see the anger inside of me. So then I pray, Divine Mother, please help me to comprehend and eliminate this anger. Why do I have this anger? Where does it come from? Please, Divine Mother, assist me to comprehend this anger. I don't want it inside of me anymore. I want to eliminate it. I want to understand where it came from, why it exists, and to annihilate it, to return it to cosmic dust. So then immediately what happens, if we can be quiet, if the mind is quiet, we will have some connection. An image or a memory will come up, which will be the answer to the prayer. Connecting, saying, oh, this is, remember when you were in elementary school or primary school or whatever, and somebody did this to you, and you felt the same emotion. Or your mother, something happened and you came home and you cried and you said to your mother or your father, oh, this happened today and I was crying, right, when you're a little kid. And they said, well, when that happens, you do this. Don't feel that way. You need to feel this way, right? And they taught us, they conditioned us on what they thought was the appropriate way to handle something, which then gave us an ego, basically. But it gave us first a mental representation. It gave us a concept that we then used to build more egos. So anyway, I pray about this person banging into me with the cart. The image comes up, and then I say, I'm angry because of pride, because I'm proud. I don't think somebody should bang into me. I don't think somebody should be allowed to give me a look like that, right? Where does all that come from? Well, from movies and television. They say, oh, everyone needs to be a gangster nowadays, right? You can't look at me that way. What are you looking at, right? Banging into me. Oh, it's disrespectful. I think I deserve respect. And it's a bunch of pride. So by meditating on it and praying and asking, we begin to see the connection between the anger and this other ego, pride. And then we pray for the pride. Divine Mother, please help me to comprehend and eliminate this pride that I have related with this anger that I experienced today. I want to comprehend it more. And then we may receive more information, more memories, or more images coming up, showing us the connection. And with that comes an intuition, which is assisted by the vowel O. So if you don't get an answer right away after the prayer, then you can repeat the vowel O, doing a mantra. O, O, just like that. And we go into this on tomorrow night. We can do it together tomorrow night. If you can join us or listen to the recording afterwards. And so we do the mantras. We do the mantras, then we pray again, repeat the prayer, asking, please help me to comprehend this pride, why this pride exists, its relationship with anger, how does that happen, what's the origin of this in myself, where did it come from? And then we may see some interaction between our parents fighting as children, or one of our parents saying something to somebody else. And we start to process all of the things, all the impressions that we received that we haven't yet transformed in ourselves. And so we have to pray. Praying, asking to comprehend, asking to eliminate, to comprehend and eliminate, to remove those things from ourselves. And then there's another practice that is for actually eliminating the ego. And I'll put a link in the comments to a step-by-step guide for going through that. But that's in the end of the Advanced Gnostic Psychology class in part 10 of that. it goes into specifically how to work with the ego and going through these different stages of understanding, looking for the ego inside the different centers, the prayers to do at each phase and stuff like that. Okay, so hopefully that answered the question or assisted with the question, but we invite you to join us for the meditation tomorrow on how to pray and meditate in order to identify and work with the ego. Okay, let's see. It looks like there's some other comments here. Is this repressing anger, repressing the shadow, and make us more judgmental towards another who expressed anger? So, I mean, I'm not sure, because I'm not sure what you mean by those terms, because those aren't the exact terms that we use in Gnosis. But we're not talking about repressing anger. We're talking about comprehending anger. We're talking about finding the root of it and rooting it out, if that makes sense. To look for, we don't want to repress things. We want to observe them in ourselves. Repressing them, yeah, you're right. Repressing is not good. But someone can express anger towards us, and that's their choice. But why are we angry with them? Because they expressed anger towards us. We don't need to be angry with them. We need to be in control of ourselves, which shouldn't be repressing anger. It should be just control, period. Now, if anger wants to express itself through us, we need to look at why we are in agreement with that in some way, or where that anger is coming from. Because in the system that we're studying, anger is a negative emotion that causes problems. It is not something that we want to allow to control ourselves. That being said, let's understand that that doesn't mean we're passive all the time. We don't do anything. If there's a problem, like for example, something needs to be done, we need to make a protest, or we need to strike at the job, or we need to do something because conditions are inappropriate, then we can do that. But we can do that without anger. We do that because, no, we need to draw a line. It doesn't have to be from anger. In Gnosis, anger is related with one of the 7 deadly sins, and it is related with a demon. And the more that we encourage its expression, the more that it sets up shop inside of ourselves. And we don't want that, because anger creates more problems for us. And many of the things we mentioned today. Okay. Okay, so yeah, we invite you again to join us for the meditation tomorrow, and we can maybe enter into a better understanding with our own individual experience by doing meditation and seeing what it is that stimulated it, what it is that created, that originated these egos inside of us. Because according to the system we're studying, we are essence. We're not ego. We have egos. They exist inside of us, but they're not permanent. The essence is what's permanent, what exists for a long time, for the whole cosmic day. But these egos are keeping us trapped here. They're a fixed way of thinking, feeling, and acting, and they're a misunderstanding. They're a lack of wisdom. They're really problematic for our spiritual development, because they only see things from one perspective, from their own perspective. Knowledge, wisdom, real objective knowledge comes from objective understanding, and that requires understanding the big picture, which means we can't just see it from our perspective. We have to see the big picture. Gnosis allows us to enter into that. Understanding the law of karma, understanding these other laws, and it really helps. Gnosis has helped me a lot. That's obviously why I'm here sharing with you guys, and I'm glad that so many of you decided to join us this evening. But it's already getting late, so we're gonna end it for this evening. Again, we invite you to join us tomorrow Same time, we'll do a meditation practice together. But thank you again for your attention, and we wish you the best in your esoteric work.